Hello, beautiful people. I'm so glad to see you all here. I'm Kimberly Dark, and I'm a writer and sociologist and storyteller. I have some simple answers for you about some of your questions about social inequality. So, these are all questions or topics that come from folks like you, maybe even some of you who are here. And you can always ask me questions that might make it onto the Hope Desk. You could put them in the chat. You could contact me on social media, which is how most of them get to me. Why are we doing this? Because, I think it's hopeful if more people feel like they know enough to be able to join civil public discourse about things that influence our lives. And so by the time we get to the end of our time together, I'm going to ask you where you think you might be able to talk about some of these topics on your own in your own life as time goes on. Because what happens when we are able to visualize ourselves having these civil conversations is that we're more likely to actually do it rather than just being quiet when somebody brings something up. So, listen, I just want to be clear that I'm not offering you in depth scholarship on these topics. In most cases, other people are more qualified to do that than I am. But I think sociologists have a perspective on the architecture of everyday life that can be helpful. So, I'm here to do my part. And today, we are talking about two topics that are so timely in the news. You may have already heard that the Supreme Court is soon to overturn Roe v. Wade, which makes abortion no longer a part of healthcare across the United States, but makes states able to, make it illegal for a woman to find that kind of healthcare. And wow, some of them have been just waiting for that moment for it to happen. So, the question that came up about this is, why are politics involved in reproductive rights at all? And this is a topic that I wanted to handle because you may not know, like right now, we have more Republicans that are like against access to health care for women in the form of abortion and more Democrats that are in favor of it. But this has not always been true. And these topic abortion, like a lot of other topics, have been manipulated by our two political parties in order to gain votes from different groups of constituents over time. So it's not actually, they're willing to change position on this sort of thing if it serves them. So, as I often do, I'm going to like back this conversation way up, back it up, and see if we can understand this question about politics and reproductive rights from a little more broad perspective. So, here's what I want to say to you: the control of women's bodies has been so normalized in our culture that we don't even notice that something weird is happening until it becomes outrageous, like criminalizing miscarriage, for instance. Like that is kind of an outrageous thing that Texas has been up to, and suddenly people go, wait a minute, that doesn't seem quite right, even though it is just one bit of evidence of the larger problem of controlling women's bodies. So let me say a few things that might sound radical to you until you think them through. For instance, consider for just a moment that sex does not cause pregnancy. I know, I'm just going to let that sit there for a moment while you try and wrap your head around it. Sex does not cause pregnancy. It's actually obvious that it doesn't when you start to realize that two lesbians can have all the sex in the world and there's no danger of pregnancy ever. Two men can have all the sex in the world, there's no danger of pregnancy ever. What actually causes pregnancy is getting sperm near a womb. That gives the possibility of pregnancy. So there are a lot of ways that even men and women can have sex together that don't cause pregnancy. But this is an example of how control over women's bodies has become so normalized that we don't even notice that our frames for seeing information like pregnancy are completely whack. They're like really bizarre, right? Because pretty much everybody thinks sex causes pregnancy and it's the woman who's in charge of being sure it doesn't happen. When you think that through, it doesn't make any sense because, you know, men or women, who has more control over sexual encounters? Well, if you look at incidents of forced sexual encounters that might cause pregnancy, it certainly isn't the woman. So this is just, one example. One example here is that we could look at the whole deal about pregnancy differently in terms of what causes a pregnancy. Also, you could consider body sovereignty laws, right? We have already decided, for instance, that people can control their own bodies. Like if there's a car accident and you could give somebody a blood transfusion and save that person's life, you don't have to. And nobody's going to convict you of murder for not using your body to save theirs. And so here's another example of control of women's bodies being so normalized. I mean, I've been pregnant, folks. I can just attest for you, if you have not ever had the experience, it's a hell of a lot bigger deal than giving a blood transfusion, that's for sure. It's probably even a bigger deal than giving a kidney, which you also don't have to do if you don't want to. So somehow we have decided as a group that women are exempt from what we have already decided is true about humans, that you don't have to do something with your body to save someone else's life. This is even if you believe that a fetus equals a person, which you might not believe that. No? All right, here's the deal. One tactic that politicians use in order to gain support is to create a problem and then solve it and be heroes. So this is one of the ways that this issue became involved as a political issue. That if we can create the problem of, oh my God, women are murderers if they get abortions, and then we solve that problem, it's a way to get a whole lot of votes. It's a way to stay in the news cycle, in the media, and solve a problem that didn't exist in the first place. What I mean by didn't exist in the first place is that if you are viewing abortion as a form of healthcare that is between a woman and her healthcare provider, nobody needs to know about that unless she chooses to talk about it. Yeah, so that's what I mean by inventing a social problem. Because you know what's actually a social problem in terms of body sovereignty? Like what's actually a social problem are things like rape or incest or forced medical procedures, right? And if a person's sovereignty causes a loss of life, like withholding a blood transfusion, then, we've already decided that's okay. I'll give you just another example of this thing politicians do in order to create a problem, solve it, and then be heroes and stay in the news cycle while they talk about it. Voter fraud. Voter fraud is another example of this. There is no evidence of widespread voter fraud in the United States. It's very hard to do. And when you are able to steal a vote, what do you have? You have one vote in addition to the one that you already had. So voter fraud was an invented political problem, but look what it has allowed politicians to do. It has allowed Republicans in particular to limit the number of people who actually can vote. So that's an example of a problem that is invented and then solved, and then, hey, some people feel like, hey, those Republicans did really great in that regard. All right. At different times, both political parties have decided they can manipulate voters better by curtailing women's human rights. So, for instance, creating the problem that abortion is murder and then figuring out how to solve it. That's just one example. And of course, who suffers the most It's going to be women without economic opportunities, because if you have economic opportunities, you're still going to go buy an abortion that is illegal. Yeah. Women of color, disabled women, any disenfranchised group is going to be hit harder by this kind of social control. So I just want to, I just want to put it out there that this question, like, when does life begin, is also a distraction. It's an irrelevant question if we already have decided that humans have the right not to use their bodies to save somebody else's life if they don't want to. So here's the other thing that gets all mixed in here is religion. I mean, you probably already know this. First of all, religion does not run government. And that's what we've decided in the United States, even though it sneaks in there anyway. So it should never matter for governmental policies what the Bible or the Quran or any other religious text says about abortion. That's not how we have agreed to function. Here's another thing, the Supreme Court ruling. Some of you may have already seen what the Supreme Court is planning to say, since this is a leaked document so far, is that there's not a long-standing tradition of abortion in the United States. That's an interesting claim, because indigenous folks in North America did have a history of providing abortion when needed, and Europeans also had a tradition of providing abortion when needed. But the settlers who came from Europe to the United States actually wanted a larger population, and so limiting abortion was one way to do that, by controlling women's bodies. So just consider who's actually being controlled: more poor than rich, more Black, indigenous, people of color than white women, more immigrants than US born, more disabled than able bodied. I mean, there's a long history with each of these things. We are entrenching precedents that serve other functions in US politics and that are already legible to voters based on who deserves punishment. So, by limiting abortion, it is also a way to punish people that certain political constituents want to see punished. I know that takes a minute to think that through as well. So, what I really am offering you here with regard to the answer to this question is that this is both a straw man argument, like a made up problem that then you get a solution to, and a red herring argument, because it draws attention away from the fact that some people are being forced into poverty by others' greed. Some people are having their humanity trampled in the name of religious control, and some are disenfranchised through imprisonment or fines or public shaming so that they cannot make choices that would improve their own lives. Like, that's actually what's happening, and why politics have become involved in reproductive health care. I have an article for you that you can read more about this sort of thing from Vox. And this is an article that really outlines, like, you can see how for a while Republicans were the ones against abortion, in favor of abortion, and Democrats were against it, and then those switched. And this is really a political history of how that has happened in the United States. And I think Emily's going to put that in the chat for you to look at.
Yep, I put it in there.
All righty. Is there anybody who has further questions about this issue of why politics need to be involved in reproductive health care in the first place? And go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry, I had the wrong setting set. You can unmute yourselves now if you have a question.
Okay, hi, Professor Dark. I had you at San Marcos for one class, but
Great.
I wanted to ask a quick question. Yes, I wanted to ask a quick question. I don't know if you know the answer, but since the Supreme Court is going to be overturning Roe v. Wade, do you know if there's a certain amount of time that has to go by before this, Supreme Court ruling can be challenged again? Or do you know any of like the processes behind that?
I don't know how long before it can be challenged again, but I will say this: a whole lot of the discourse right now. So Roe v. Wade is based on the idea that when a fetus is viable, that's when you can no longer viable outside of the woman's body, right? That's when you can no longer abort it. But before that, abortion is legal. So right now, though, there are a lot of people that are focused on this idea of when you can hear a heartbeat, which is way sooner than when the baby could survive outside of the woman's body. So, depending on what criteria they use, it's possible that a challenge is not going to work. And I've only read a little bit so far since this just happened last night, right? About the leaked information from the Supreme Court. But what they're trying to do is challenge the validity of Roe v. Wade, not just to say that it is, not the way that the American law should go, but to say that it was a faulty decision in the first place. And I think that is a strategic move to try and make sure it can't be challenged. But I feel certain that at least the ACLU will make a challenge at some point, but I don't know when. I don't know when. I hope it's clear to you that the reason that I started talking about framing, like what is pregnancy and how does it happen, is that depending on how you frame this issue and this question, you get a whole bunch of different answers, different possibilities are suddenly emerge depending on how you frame the question. And for people who say, but like it says in the Bible this, it's like that's never going to be relevant. That's like me pulling a book off of my shelf and going, well, it says here. And, plenty of people can go like, so what's that book? Right? So like this whole idea of like religion, the role of religion, we've already decided there's a separation of church and state. Stop it. I think the same is true with bodily sovereignty. We've already decided you don't have to use your body to help anybody else, any other living human being. So stop it, right? So depending on the frame you use, this whole idea about keeping somebody from getting a certain kind of health care becomes absurd anyway. But what the Supreme Court is trying to do is frame it differently so that it will be harder to challenge.
I just wanted to follow up really quick. As you're talking about framing, how do you think abortions that may be medically necessary for the mother, how do you think those are going to work with Roe v. Wade? Like as you can frame it from a medical standpoint, if it is necessary, or say it's like an ectopic pregnancy where, the baby won't survive, but so an abortion is needed since, there's something wrong with it. Are those still going to be allowed? Do you know?
So
Or
listen, if what's going to happen is that each state gets to decide. They're going to decide based on their own framing. And this is why the very first thing that I offered you all is that the control of women's bodies has become so normalized, we don't even notice that there's something weird about it. And so the idea, and many states have already said that this is how they're going to frame the issue, is that the baby is the one that gets saved if there's a choice between saving the baby or the mother. And even though the mother is a already living viable human being and the fetus potentially is or is not, they've already said that is how they're going to frame this issue. So I think we're going to see a range of new laws, and some of them will be hugely restrictive, and that's going to suck. It's raining where I am. Can you hear it? Anything else about this topic?
Yes, I would like to add something to this.
Yes.
So, going back to what she just said right now, I don't know if anybody read, but as of yesterday, I know Governor Newsom said that he announced that the constitutional amendment to enshrine the right to choose in California. So he's going against what the Supreme Court has been deciding as of now.
Yeah.
And I think not just with abortion, but for like low income, I know for women's rights, for the breast exam and the pap smears, for those who can't afford them, why do you limit them? Why are they limited to every 5 to 10 years? I mean, what if I just got a pap smear yesterday and they're like, okay, come in the next 5 years and I get cancer in 2 years? Like, what is that? Just because I can't afford it? That's not fair. I don't think that's appropriate. And it's not, because it puts a lot of not just women, well, yeah, women in this case, but other people in some pretty tight spots, and it puts their health in danger as well.
That's right. Well, I completely agree with you, and this is another topic that most of the world has decided that if they can provide health care, it should be available to all. And the US has not yet decided that. And so there are very many arbitrary limits on how much health care you can receive. And that's just one of them. This is definitely another. And what you said there in the beginning about the state of California, I think is really important. There are many states in the US that when Roe v. Wade is overturned, they're not going to change anything, right? California is a great example because the governor has already said we're doubling down, right? Like, and there's we're happy to provide these services to women from other states. Of course, that doesn't help poor women who can't afford to travel, but I don't know. I'm hoping what we might see is an increase in organizing to get women in states that need that health care to be able to access abortion pills, or to be able to access travel for those procedures. So time will tell what happens. But yes, of course, there is the broader issue of why are we limiting healthcare for anyone? Anything else right now? I'm going to move on to the second topic, if not. And you can still ask questions about the first topic later, too. All right, the second question. Here's how it came up. Do we still need unions? What's happening at Amazon now? Didn't they unionize? Okay. So here's the simple answer. Do we still need unions? Yes. Why is that? Because there are no examples historically of widespread worker gains, that is, things like a living wage or health coverage or days off or bereavement leave, anything like this, retirement benefits. There are no examples historically of widespread worker gains that did not come from collective bargaining. So let us first understand what collective bargaining is. And when I say widespread gains, by the way, here's what I mean by that. It's possible for one single small business. Let me pick one that's even a mid-sized business, like the Ben and Jerry's ice cream guys, right? Like, they decided they wanted to have an ethically run business, and they decided, here's how we do that. We charge this much, and we give people these benefits, and we offer them, these wages. And that's great. That's great. That's one medium-sized business, but it is not a widespread precedent for people being able to make enough money to live indoors and eat food and have transportation. And that's actually what we want, is for people who work full time to be able to get by pretty well, no matter what the job is, right? Because the culture needs doctors and lawyers, but the culture also needs, rooms cleaned and garbage taken out and, classes taught and all kinds of things. Yeah. So the answer is yes, we do still need unions. So just so that we're all on the same page about what is collective bargaining, that is a situation where individuals speak together because they have the ability to withhold their collective labor if they are not heard. No? So if you as an individual go and ask the boss for something, it might be like, oh, we can't afford that. No, no. But if you and everybody else that work there say, hey, look, we need a little more money. And if we don't get it, we're all going to go together and you can't produce your thing anymore because off we go and you don't know how to do my job anyway. And so there is more power in collective bargaining than in individual bargaining. That is what a union is. It's collective bargaining. Workers united come up with an agenda for what they want and they bargain for it. So let me just say this. The simple reason that there are not more unions is that businesses use intimidation and manipulation to convince people they should not stand together for collective bargaining. They also lobby politicians to make it harder for people to bargain collectively. And why do they do that? Because it makes them more money, and greed is what rules the day. Have you noticed that we have the biggest gap on the planet between rich and poor in the United States, because most other nations have some mechanism that tries to make sure that people who work have a living wage and some kind of health care and some kind of, safety net. All right. The answer to the second part of this question is that no, Amazon is not unionized now. There is one warehouse that successfully put through a union vote. There have since then been other warehouses that have tried to do that with Amazon and have failed with the union vote. So, Emily, can you share the article about the Staten Island Amazon? And these are just, little internet, easy to access resources. But what can happen, what was so great about that one warehouse organizing, is that they didn't do it with much money and much organizing. It was, a worker-led situation, and pow, it happened. And that's really cool, but it's going to be harder in a lot of places. Starbucks is also making some progress right now. So, hey, I am going to ask that we take a look at 4 minutes out of an 8-minute video that I think you might like. And maybe Emily can cue that up now. So this is a guy who does like a, video blog and a little newsletter, and he's using some good, solid sources. I would recommend that you follow his, sign up for his newsletter. And if you want to hear his tales of being a bartender at a dive bar in Appalachia, you could also follow his TikTok account. He's a little bit entertaining. So I like this, that we should find folks that have really solid information and, link up, right? Ally with people that are doing good work. And he did this Unions 101, a crash course on worker power. And I think the first 4 minutes of it is worth our time together. Off we go.
Unions 101, here we go. What are unions? How do they work? How do you start one? What do they do? Why do we need them? Myths, facts, more. We're talking about all that because right now is one of the biggest moments for worker-led organizing in the last half century. This is a long video, but the short story is this. We are in a second Gilded Age. Billionaires and corporations are as rich and powerful as they've ever been, and just like then, unions and working class power movements are still the main way out. So here are some facts. Unionized workers make about $11,000 more per year than non-union workers across the board. They have higher wages, employer-provided health care, retirement benefits, guaranteed pensions, not to mention that a union contract means that your boss can't just fire you because they don't like the t-shirt you're wearing that day. There has to be just cause and due process. Any way you cut it, a union means more money, power, and a better life for its members.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Do not go anywhere. This is where most people statistically drop off in a video. I know because of my analytics, and I can see you through your front camera. So keep going, dummy. I'm trying to help you out.
So what the heck are unions anyway? They are a group of workers who decide to organize into a nonprofit. That's it. They're run democratically by their worker members, everything's voted on, and nothing happens without the consent of the members. Unions negotiate with companies for better wages, benefits, time off, whatever you, the members that make and run the union, decide to push for. They work by strength in numbers. You can ask for these things alone and be laughed at, or you can demand them with your coworkers by your side. No wealth creation happens without workers, so together we all hold the power.
Are you sleeping yet? We'll wake up, okay? It's time to tell the boss off.
But here's the part that most people don't know. It is a snooze fest, but like most snooze fests, it's very important, and it's like a minute if you want to skip ahead. The right to organize a union is protected by the Constitution of the United States and by federal law. It is in the very First Amendment. The right of the people peaceably to assemble. Just like your right to free speech, the First Amendment guarantees freedom of association and is recognized by U.S. courts as a fundamental right. Also, freedom of association for advancing shared values is the liberty written into the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. And backing all of these constitutional rights up is the 1935 National Labor Relations Act. It lays out exactly what workers can do, and more importantly, exactly what companies cannot do when workers organize. Union busting and retaliation, even though common, is illegal. And it's the job of the NLRB, created in that 1935 law, to protect and enforce your rights, so you can do something about it. In short, any organizing that you do is as central to the U.S. Constitution as free speech. It is an American birthright for everybody, and it is definitely time to use it.
Ooh, this is a lot. You still with me? It's time for a little puppy break. Hi, me puppy.
Working Americans aren't exactly enjoying the fruits of their labor. Our retirement savings are terrible. Our rule of thumb is to have $1 million or more in the bank by the time you retire. Only 16% of Americans have more than $200,000 saved. The median savings at retirement age is 17% of what is needed for a comfortable retirement. More than half of the country could not cover an emergency $1,000 expense. The bottom half of Americans combined literally have a negative net worth, meaning they are worth less than $0. And the majority of workers are working more hours for not much more pay. Meanwhile, billionaires and the rich are winning it all. 3 men own as much as the bottom half of Americans. The richest 5% own 66% of the country's wealth. And billionaires, for the first time in history, paid a lower tax rate than the working class in 2018.
Did you think I had just one puppy? Oh, little puppy.
All right,
oh,
that's enough
second
for
puppy.
now. We're gonna just watch the dog number 2. So you can watch the second half of that video later if you would like to. He makes some good points very quickly. Hopefully you understand the idea of how unions operate and what happens. The next thing he's going to talk about in that video is how to form a union, that you can, you could learn about that if you would like to do that yourself. And he also handles some myths about unions, and I want to just mention a couple of those. One of them is that somehow unions are coming in from the outside, but it isn't true, right? Unions are made up of people who work in that place, and they negotiate with each other. They discuss with each other what they want to negotiate with the boss. Also, people say, oh, well, if you form a union, then they're going to just fire you, or they're going to, shut down the warehouse, for instance, if it's Amazon. That's not legal. I mean, I guess it might happen, but it's not legal. And, there's going to be some recourse for that if it does happen. So that's not the biggest danger going on there. There's other things also, that it costs too much. Actually, you're paying a percentage of it's a very small percentage of whatever you gain, and so there's always going to be a bigger gain than what the cost of union membership is. It's pretty compelling when you think about across the board, $11,000 more per year for union members than for non-unionized folks. That means it's more or less at some workplaces, but it's pretty significant. And in the United States, we used to have more union membership. I can remember, because I'm old, a time when that was an expected thing, right? It was like you worked for a union shop, like let's say you were a factory worker, or you were a longshoreman, or you were working in a warehouse. That was a good thing if you worked in a union shop. Does anybody remember there used to be like an ad on television that the jingle I still remember? Just look for the union label when you're buying a new coat or dress. The idea being that it was an American value to want people to be paid a fair wage. And so you would look to see, right? Am I buying clothes from a union shop? That was important because you wanted to be a good American and make sure everybody was paid well. And we've lost some of those values, and some of that, well, not some of it, it is not accidental, right? It is both political and it has to do with the greed of corporations. So yes, we still need unions. Does anyone have questions about this topic so far? I mean, I even sang for you today the jingle from the commercial. So hopefully that gets the message across. Any questions about either topic that we have covered today? You might already have come up with some other things to talk about regarding the the political nature of abortion. All right, so this is the moment when I am going to ask you. Oh, we got a question in the chat. I need to pay attention to the chat once in a while, don't I? When was the switch to non-union labor? Hey, there are still unions. I mean, let's be clear. You know, I am a member of a union. I teach at Cal State San Marcos, and as a lecturer, I am a member of a union there. And that's an amazing thing, right? Most universities do not have lecturers unionized, but the Cal State system does. So let's be clear, there are still unions out there in the United States. But when did the switch come toward having less union labor? Well, that would be the Reagan era of the 1980s. And some of that had to do with political shifts, right? And specific union busting tactics, again, that politicians decided were going to be better for their bottom line, their voter, you know, that supporting big business was going to be better for them. So, you know, a lot of Republican politicians came out against union membership, and there was all kind of weird, I mean, weird in the 80s, things going around about what it meant to be part of a union. Like I remember hearing crazy stories and being like, can that be true? That that the union is organized crime? That the union is, you know, really just the mafia? I mean, like people would say things like that, even though it's obviously absurd because, you know, as you saw in the video, your right to assemble with others and to discuss things is protected in the First Amendment. So that's a brief answer to that question, but that is where we saw a bigger drop than most. Anything else? Okay. I also want to ask you, can you think of anywhere where you might be able to discuss some of these topics in the coming days or weeks or months? And it might be like you can imagine, I don't know, I think a lot of you are going to have an opportunity to talk about the overturning of Roe v. Wade because it's going to be front page news for quite a while. So maybe you can imagine how you might use some of the things that I've said, or you know, some other things that you have read to have those discussions. If you don't mind sharing with us how you might talk about abortions as politics or unions or Amazon. And you don't have to share, but you know, I want to give you the opportunity because it inspires other people to hear about how you might share. All right. Well, I do hope that you're thinking about it. And I hope that when you enter into these conversations, that they are civil discussions. What I mean by that is that you respect the humanity of whomever you are speaking to, regardless of whether they share your views.
Candace, did you want to say something? I noticed you put your camera on.
I guess not. I just wanted to be here, present. I'm trying to do three things at once, but for a minute, I'm just going to be showing myself to you because that's part
That's
of
fine.
community. It's community to be present. And I work for the National Education Association. We're 70% female, and we have almost 3 million members. So the impact on the group is great, but the politics internally around this issue are so deep.
Yeah.
And where do our kids get their attitudes from? And I'll just leave it at that because I'm not in the politics anymore. I'm staff, but we have never worked for abortion. We wrote an amicus brief one time when a nun was going to lose her job because she became pregnant from a rape, and we said that wasn't appropriate. That's the only activism NEA has ever done around abortions that is connected in any way. And so, yeah, we do take a pretty good hit for supporting that because I'm sure many of our members are pro-choice and actively work on that issue.
Yeah. Yeah, but what you raise here is the level of cruelty that has come about as a result of, where things like rape or incest or, the mother is going to die if if there's not an abortion. I mean, it's obvious that this is a form of health care that needs to be available to people when they need it. And I also want to just point out too is that when there is so much shame around something like abortion, we forget that 25% of women have had at least one abortion. Like literally 1 in 4 women that you ever will meet or talk to, right? And this is a widespread medical procedure that people have taken advantage of. And given that women don't deserve to be shamed for having sex and certainly don't deserve to be shamed for sperm getting near a womb when there's obviously 2 people involved in that decision, or there should be, then we should be able to talk about this as a form of healthcare more often. Plenty of resources out there on that. Take a look at what is the name of the book that was edited by Lindy West a couple years ago. Anyway, you could look up her name if you wanted to. That talks about, look, let's normalize this because it is actually a widespread experience, 1 in 4 women. Well, I appreciate that somebody in the chat has said I will definitely have a conversation with my mom and my sister about the Supreme Court decision. Excellent place to start. It is an excellent choice to start around your own dinner table, having conversations about challenging topics. And that gives us, it gives us a little courage and practice to have conversations at the bus stop or at your book group or in the bar or, wherever it is you happen to find yourself. Thank you so much, Emily, for your help. Thank all of you for coming this month, and I'll see you next month.